Good evening, and welcome back to Futurelore, where history isn't just remembered, it's retold as a bedtime story. Tonight's story takes you into one of history's most mysterious and haunting lost civilizations, the Empire of Tartaria. So find a comfortable spot and let the gentleness of the evening surround you. In this journey, we will wander through candlelit homes and sunlit fields, bustling market squares and sacred temples, all beneath the same wide sky that once watched over Tartaria. Our story begins on a calm night in a small Tartarian village. Act 1. Night in the village. The sun had long set, leaving behind a tapestry of deep indigo sky dusted with stars. In a valley cradled by gentle hills, a small village lay in tranquil silence. Stone cottages with carved wooden doors stood in neat rows along a dusty path, encircling a central well. By day, children chased one another between these homes, and farmers led their oxen to water at that well, but now only the soft chorus of crickets and an occasional owl's hoot kept watch over the sleeping hamlet. From the direction of a nearby stream came the faint croak of a frog, joining the night's gentle music. In one cozy cottage near the village centre, golden lamplight glowed through a round window. Inside, a family was settling in for the night. The Baikiev family, Mother Layla, Father Altan, Grandmother Sophia, and 16-year-old Dastan, lean from long days in the sun and bright-eyed with youthful curiosity, shared this home. They had finished their supper not long ago. The warm scent of lentil stew and fresh flatbread still hung in the air. Layla quietly cleared away the wooden bowls from the low table, her movements unhurried and mindful. A slender woman with warm brown skin and dark hair tucked under a patterned kerchief. She moved with an easy grace, born of years of caring for her home and family. Altan, a sturdy man with kind eyes and a short beard just starting to grey, sat on a thick woven rug, dyed in patterns of deep red and gold by Layla's own hand, as he carefully repaired a hand plough. His large hands were gentle as they worked, and the tool's metal edge caught the lamplight, with each precise stroke of his file. In the far corner, Grandmother Sophia rocked in a carved chair, spinning wool into yarn on a drop spindle. Her silver-streaked hair was coiled in a thick braid at the nape of her neck, and her face was lined with years and wisdom, each crease a testament to joys and sorrows long past. Beside her, Dastan sat cross-legged, listening intently as the old woman spoke in a low, soothing voice. And so, when the brave Arslan laid down his sword, the heavens rewarded his courage, Sophia recited in a sing-song cadence, nearing the tale's end. They hung his likeness among the stars. That night, the first summer star rose, a bright new light to guide the weary and give hope to the lost. Her voice softened on the final words, carrying the gentle moral of the tale to her listeners. Grandmother Sophia smiled at her audience. She had a way of speaking that painted pictures in the mind. Her low voice mingled with the soft crackle of the hearth's last embers and the occasional sigh of night breeze through the window shutters as she began a new tale from her youth. Dastan leaned closer, his dark eyes shining with curiosity. He loved Grandmother's evening tales, stories of heroes and ancient kings, of sacred mountains and the great river that gave life to their land. Layla finished tidying and came to sit by her mother's feet, listening to the tale as well. Altan put aside the repaired plough and stretched, rubbing his calloused hands. "What happens next, Mama?" he prompted gently, as eager as his son to hear the rest. Though he had heard these tales countless times since his own childhood, there was comfort in the familiar story. Grandmother Sophia's eyes grew distant, fixed on some point far beyond the cottage walls. After a pause, she spoke again, her eyes shining with a distant light. "I remember a festival of lights in the capital many years ago," she began softly. "I was not much older than you, Dastan. My father had taken me along on a great journey, all the way to the imperial city. Oh, how dazzling it was. Sophia's gaze gleamed, reflecting the lamp's glow as she recalled the memory. That night, the city was dressed in lights. Every window and every rooftop had a lantern, and the streets were lined with torches that burned in all colors: golden, sapphire blue, emerald green. I remember the rich scent of incense and sweet fried pastries in the air. My father bought me a sticky honey cake from a cheerful vendor. I can still recall its taste. By the second bite, I had syrup on my nose and he laughed. Sophia chuckled, and Dastan grinned, picturing the scene. Grandmother continued, her voice painting the scene. People from all corners of Tartaria filled the grand plaza, wearing their finest clothes. There were merchants from the eastern deserts, with bright silks, and dancers from the western mountains, with feathers and bells on their ankles. Music from flutes and drums echoed between marble buildings, and laughter was everywhere. I remember looking up at the buildings around the plaza. They had such splendid portals and vast coloured domes, shining with their own lanterns and firelight. Britannica.com. It was as if the city itself had dressed in jewels for the occasion. In the centre of the plaza stood a towering statue of a great winged horse. That night, they lit 1,000 floating lanterns around it. I held onto my father's hand as we watched those lanterns rise like new stars drifting up into the sky. My heart felt like it could burst with joy. Everyone, strangers from distant villages, travellers from far lands, everyone was embracing and singing together, as if we were all one family under the heavens. I'll never forget how beautiful it was, all of us united in that light. As Sophia spoke, Dastan could almost see it himself. A sea of people bathed in lantern glow, faces upturned to the glowing sky. He imagined the warmth and unity his grandmother described, and felt a longing he couldn't quite name. It sounded like the entire world was at peace, in that moment she described. That was the festival of 1,000 lights, Sophia concluded gently, her voice filled with reverence. It only happens once every decade, when the harvest moon rises at the same time as the winter comet. Perhaps, she patted Dastan's knee, perhaps one day you'll see it too. Dastan's eyes shone. I'd like that, he whispered. Altan, who had been listening while he worked, nodded thoughtfully. I remember hearing tales of that festival, though I've never seen it. They say the lights could be seen from hilltops a day's ride away. Oh, yes, Sophia agreed, a faraway smile on her lips. The night the lights rose, even the stars were put to shame by the glow. A comfortable silence fell in the wake of Sophia's tale. Each of them could still picture the glowing lanterns and joyous crowds as if they had been there. Layla noticed Dastan fighting a yawn, his eyelids growing heavy. It was late, and the long day of work was catching up with him. Time for bed, Dastan, she whispered to her son, who was indeed stifling a yawn. The boy nodded, though he cast one more longing glance at his grandmother. He loved these moments, and wished the night could last a little longer. Sophia reached out to pat Dastan's hand. Tomorrow is nearly here, she said in her melodic, reassuring tone. You'll dream of Tartarian heroes tonight, I'm sure. Dastan smiled sleepily. Altan rose to his feet with a quiet groan, stretching his arms. I'll just make sure the animals are settled for the night, he said softly. He lifted a small hooded lantern from a peg by the door. Though the moonlight alone might suffice, the lantern's warm glow was a comforting habit. Care to join me for a minute, son? Dastan's tired eyes lit up at the suggestion. A breath of cool night air sounded refreshing. Yes, father, he whispered, trying not to disturb grandmother dozing in her chair. Layla stood as well, gathering up the empty teacups. She smiled indulgently at her husband and son. "Don't be long," she murmured, pressing a woven shawl into Dastan's hands. "And mind the chill." Dastan draped the shawl around his shoulders and slipped into his leather sandals by the door. Altan pushed the wooden door open, and together they stepped out into the night. Outside, the world was silvery and still. The moon, nearly full, hung above the eastern hills, bathing the village in gentle light. The dirt path outside their cottage was pale under the moonshine, and the outlines of neighboring homes were visible as slumbering shapes. Most windows were dark now. Only one or two showed faint glimmers, where perhaps another family lingered late over conversation or prayer. Father and son walked a few paces to a small pen and stable behind their cottage. Inside the pen, their 2 goats stirred softly at the sound of footsteps. One goat bleated in recognition. Altan chuckled under his breath and stepped over to pat the creature's back through the wooden fence. "Good night to you too," he whispered to the goat, who nuzzled his hand once before settling down again on a bed of straw. In the adjacent shelter, their old cow, Masha, was already asleep on her feet, her broad flank unmoving, except for the slow, steady rhythm of breath. A barn cat darted past, a silent shadow on the hunt for mice. Dastan smiled as he spotted it vanish behind a haystack. Together, he and his father checked the latch on the gate and the stable door. Satisfied that all was secure, Altan lifted the lantern and cast its light around the yard one last time. The vegetable patch behind the house, rows of cabbage and carrots, lay quiet under the dew that was beginning to form. Beyond their fence stretched the open fields, a sea of grain that seemed almost white under the moon. Dastan drew in a deep breath of the night. The air smelled of hay and distant jasmine. A gentle breeze carried the promise of cooler hours before dawn. Overhead, the sky was vast and overflowing with stars. For a moment, neither father nor son spoke. They simply stood side by side, gazing upward. The stars here in the countryside were bright and untarnished by city lights. The Milky Way arced overhead like a shimmering banner. Dastan's heart swelled with a familiar wonder. Altan raised his arm to point out a particularly bright star in the north. "See that one?" he said quietly. "The big bright one, just above the old oak tree." "Yes," Dastan said, peering where his father pointed. It was one of the brightest points in the sky, twinkling steadily. "That's the hero Arslan," Altan said. "Grandmother Sophia used to tell me when I was a boy that he watches over travelers at night. Wherever you go in Tartaria, that star will guide you home." Dastan drank in his father's words, imagining the legendary hero shining down. The idea was comforting, that no matter how far one wandered, the light of home remained constant in the sky. His eyes drifted toward the west, where beyond the gentle rise of the land lay far-off places he had never seen. The black silhouette of distant mountains saw-toothed the horizon. Those were the mountains that bordered his known world. How much farther did Tartaria stretch beyond them? What wonders lay out there in lands he'd only heard about in stories? A tingle of excitement went through him despite the late hour. "Someday I'll know," he promised himself silently, the same promise he had made before. "Someday I'll travel past those mountains." Altan seemed to sense his thoughts. The father glanced down at his son with a knowing smile, placing a strong but gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "All in good time, Dastan," he said softly. "For now, let's get you to bed. Dawn comes quickly." From the open doorway of the cottage, Layla's voice called out in a low tone, carrying a hint of amusement. "Are you 2 stargazers coming back in?" "You'll catch a cold out there." Father and son exchanged a grin. Their midnight excursion was at an end. With a final satisfied look around the peaceful yard, Altan lowered the hood of the lantern to dim its light and guided Dastan back toward the warm glow of the house. They stepped inside, closing the wooden door firmly behind them to keep out the chill. The cozy warmth of the cottage embraced them. Layla was by the hearth, covering the last low embers. Sophia had already shuffled off to her small bed in the corner. The old woman murmured a drowsy good night from under her quilt. "Good night, my boy," she whispered to Dastan, her voice thick with drowsiness, yet full of love from across the room. "Good night, grandmother," Dastan replied softly. Layla stepped away from the hearth to embrace her son. Though he was nearly grown, Dastan didn't shy from the hug. This nightly ritual was as comforting as grandmother's stories. One by one, he hugged his mother and father, feeling their warmth surround him. Layla kissed the top of his head gently. "Sleep well, my dear. May your dreams be gentle," she murmured. Altan placed a broad hand on Dastan's shoulder and squeezed affectionately. "We have an early start tomorrow. I need you in the fields at first light," he reminded, though his tone was more fond than stern. "I'll be there," Dastan promised earnestly. Soon Dastan lay on his cot, sinking into the thin mattress stuffed with straw. The linen blanket he pulled over himself was light and cool, perfect for the mild night, and carried the faint scent of sun-dried grass. His head rested on a pillow that Layla had sewn for him, with a few sprigs of lavender tucked inside to ease one's dreams. In the dimness, the softly glowing lamp was turned low, just enough to cast shadows that danced on the walls. He heard his mother murmuring a quiet prayer at the hearth, her nightly thanksgiving to the world. Layla thanked the fertile earth for the food that had graced their table, and the vast sky for watching over their home. He heard his father quietly add a piece of wood to the embers to keep a low warmth through the night. Grandmother Sophia, half asleep, began humming an old lullaby. It was a tune older than any of them, an ancient cradle song about a white bird that carried good dreams on its wings. Layla joined in from across the room, her soft alto blending in gentle harmony with Sophia's wavering humming. The melody was like a tender whisper in the dark, reassuring any listening spirits that this family was safe and together. This was the same song that had cradled Dastan when he was just a baby in Layla's arms. Even now, hearing it made him feel as secure and loved as the little child he once had been. Dastan's thoughts drifted as the lullaby wrapped him in warmth. He imagined again the great festival grandmother had described. In his mind's eye, he saw torchlit streets and people dancing, heard distant music and drums. He pictured towering buildings gleaming under starlight, and perhaps great balloons or airships drifting above. For in some tales, Tartarians flew ships in the sky, though he was not sure if that was only legend. The images made him smile in his half-dreaming state. His mind then gently shifted back to home, the quiet realities of tomorrow. He pictured the fields at dawn that he and Altan would walk to, the golden wheat waiting to be harvested beneath the rising sun. There was comfort in knowing the cycle of day and night, work and rest, would continue as ever. That comforting thought, as much as the lullaby, lulled him further toward sleep. Outside, a gentle wind sighed through the wheat fields surrounding the village. The stalks, nearly ready for harvest, swayed and rustled like an ocean of gold, even in the darkness. That sound, too, was familiar and soothing, the fields speaking in their quiet language. One by one, the cottage's inhabitants fell asleep. Grandmother's humming faded into soft snores. Layla and Altan curled up on their own straw-filled mattress, not far from Dastan's cot, whispering a few last words to each other about the next day's chores until their voices trailed off. Dastan, cocooned in the semi-darkness, watched the lamps glow on the ceiling and traced the shapes of the carved wooden beams above. Each beam was etched with patterns of vines and lotus flowers, craftsmanship done by Altan's grandfather years ago. In those carvings were echoes of Tartaria's art, even in a modest home. As Dastan's eyes finally closed, he felt content. Here, In this little village in the heart of Tartaria, he was surrounded by love and peace. His last sleepy thought was that the world was wide and full of wonder, and he was safe in his small corner of it. Outside, the village slumbered as one. The moon climbed higher in the clear sky, draping silver light over roofs and the central well. The wheat fields whispered softly whenever a breeze passed, as if talking in their sleep. All around was a profound peace, the kind that only deep night knows. In time, even the owl's gentle hoot fell silent, leaving only the chorus of crickets to mark the slow passing of hours. Act 2. Sunrise over the fields. The first light of dawn crept gently over the eastern hills, tinting the sky in hues of rose and gold. In the village, roosters began their morning chorus, crowing enthusiastically to announce the new day. Birds stirred in the fruit orchards, and a soft breeze carried the fresh scent of dew-kissed earth. One by one, windows and doors in the cottages started to open, letting out curls of hearth smoke as families stoked their morning fires. Inside the Baykeeves' cottage, the air was still cool and pleasantly tinged with the smell of last night's wood smoke. Layla was the first to rise. She draped a shawl over her shoulders and moved quietly about the main room, careful not to wake the others just yet. From a covered clay pot, she scooped out a portion of dough left to ferment overnight. Today's bread. With practiced motions, she shaped the dough into flat rounds. Soon she had the tandir oven, a rounded clay oven that stood in their yard, crackling with a new fire. As the flames settled into embers, Layla slapped the rounds of dough onto the inner walls of the oven. In minutes, the comforting aroma of baking flatbread began to fill the dawn air. While the bread baked, Layla fetched a pail of fresh water from the barrel they kept by the door, water that Altan and Dastan had drawn from the well the night before. She set a kettle to boil and added a pinch of dried herbs, chamomile, and thyme for morning tea. The steam curled upward, bringing a herbal freshness to the kitchen. Grandmother Sophia was awake by then, shuffling over to help. She lit a slender stick of incense at the small wooden sun carving above the hearth, a customary morning offering of thanks for the new day. The delicate fragrance of sandalwood mingled with the smell of bread and tea. Sophia then settled on a low stool with a content sigh, shelling a bowl of walnuts with nimble, wrinkled fingers to add to breakfast. Before long, Altan's heavy footsteps came from the sleeping area as he too rose with the sun. Dastan, who had been sleeping soundly, blinked himself awake at the gentle clatter of dishes and the irresistible smell of fresh bread. He stretched and sat up on his cot, the last traces of his dreams fading as golden morning light filtered in through the window's shutters. "Good morning," Dastan mumbled, still groggy but smiling, as he wandered toward the hearth where his mother was already laying out breakfast. Layla turned and greeted him with a kiss on the forehead. "Good morning, my sleepy one," she chuckled. She took a warm round of flatbread from a cloth-lined basket and passed it to him. "Take this to your father. He's out washing up." Dastan did as he was asked, stepping outside barefoot into the dewy grass. The sun had just peeked over the horizon, bathing the fields in a gentle light. He spotted Altan by the water trough beside the barn, splashing his face and arms to wake himself fully. Dastan trotted over and handed him the steaming bread. Altan's face lit up at the sight and smell of the bread. "Ah, thank you, son," he said, tearing off a piece immediately. The crust was crisp and the inside soft and fluffy. Altan closed his eyes, savoring it. "Your mother's bread is the best in the village, I swear." Dastan grinned and helped himself to a small piece as well, the taste of hot, fresh bread making his stomach rumble. The two walked back to the cottage side by side, munching contentedly. Around them, the village was coming to life. A few cottages over, an older man led his cow out of its shed, the cow lowing softly as it headed for the pasture. Across the lane, a pair of children chased a stray chicken that had escaped its coop, their laughter bright in the morning air. Back inside, Layla had set the low table for breakfast. On a large plate lay more rounds of flatbread, naan, alongside a small bowl of kaymak, a thick, clotted cream, drizzled with honey. There was also a heap of fresh berries that Dastan had gathered the day before, and a white cheese that they had pressed last week. Sophia poured everyone a cup of the herbal tea from the kettle. Before eating, the family paused as Sophia quietly offered a blessing. Everyone bowed their heads for a moment. "Blessed be this food," the grandmother said softly, "and blessed be this day. May our work be joyful and our harvest plenty." It was a simple ritual, but one they observed each morning to start the day with gratitude. They ate together eagerly. The warm bread with honey and cream was a favorite, and Dastan happily smeared a generous dollop onto his piece, the honey dripping down his fingers. Layla gently scolded him to mind his manners, handing him a cloth to wipe up. But she was smiling. His youthful enthusiasm was a joy to her. The tea was fragrant and invigorating, and with each sip Dastan felt himself waking more fully, readying for the tasks ahead. Altan was already discussing the day's work. "We'll start with the wheat field, before the sun gets too high," he said between bites, looking to Dastan. "There's a section that might be ready to harvest. We can cut a good bit in the cool of the morning." Dastan nodded enthusiastically. Harvest time was busy, but he loved it. The golden grains, the sense of accomplishment in gathering what they had sown. "I'll fetch the scythes and sickles after breakfast," he offered. "Good," Altan replied. He turned to his wife. "Layla, will you be all right, handling the vegetable patch and the animals today?" Layla gave a dismissive wave of her hand as if to say, "Of course. I'll milk the cow and the goats once I finish cleaning up here, then I'll check on the cabbages and carrots. Don't worry, I can manage them." She had a sturdy competence that Altan admired deeply. Sophia chimed in. "I can help weed the vegetable rows, my knees willing. And I need to gather some mint and chamomile from the herb garden to dry for tea." "You just mind your back, Mama," Altan said kindly to the grandmother. "We need you fit and telling stories for many years yet." Sophia chuckled. "Oh, I'll be in the shade before the sun can scorch these old bones. Don't you fret." As they finished their breakfast, there came a polite knock at the open front door. Dastan looked up, a bit of honey still clinging to the corner of his mouth. In the doorway stood their neighbor, Uncle Marat, a wiry middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard and a friendly grin. He tipped his cap respectfully. "Good morning to the Bakievs," Marat called cheerfully. He held an empty clay jug in one hand. "Layla, might you have a bit of milk to spare? Our cow is not giving much these days, and my wife is craving some for her tea." "Of course, Marat. Come in," Layla replied, rising at once. She took the jug from him and went to ladle out a share from their own milk pail, which was drawn fresh that morning from Masha. "We have plenty." Masha has been generous lately. As Marat stepped inside, he sniffed appreciatively. "Is that fresh bread I smell?" "You're spoiling us all, Layla." Layla laughed. She returned with the jug filled and corked it for him. "Here you are. And take a loaf for you and Farida." She wrapped one of the flatbreads in a clean cloth and pressed it into Marat's hands. "You're too kind," Marat said, bowing his head gratefully. "Farida will be delighted." "Thank you." Altan clapped Marat on the shoulder amicably. "How are your fields this morning, friend?" Marat gave a little shrug, tucking the milk jug into the crook of his arm. "Growing, growing. Though I worry if the rains don't come soon." He glanced at the sky through the door. The morning was clear blue, not a cloud in sight. It's been a dry month, hasn't it? Altan and Layla exchanged a brief look. It was true. The summer rains had been sparser than usual lately. Not yet a serious concern, but farmers always kept an eye on such things. We could use a good shower or two, Altan agreed in a measured tone, ever the optimist. But the irrigation channels from the stream are still flowing. We'll manage. Mara nodded. Yes, we will. The ancestors will send rain when it's needed. With that hopeful note, he grinned again. Well, I'll leave you to your work. Thank you for the milk and bread. After Marat trotted off, Altan headed out to begin the day's labor, and Dastan followed close behind. The sun was now clear of the hills, shining gently down and beginning to warm the earth. Father and son crossed the small yard behind their home, passing by the animal pen. Inside, the goats bleated a morning greeting. Layla would tend them soon. For now, Dastan reached over the fence to pat one nanny goat on the head as he went by. In the simple barn, they grabbed their tools, 2 sharp sickles for cutting grain, and a scythe which Altan hefted over his broad shoulder. The wheat field stretched out beyond the barn, a graceful sea of tall stalks that rustled softly in the morning breeze. The grain heads had turned a lovely shade of amber. As they walked into the field, the dew on the wheat brushed against Dastan's trousers, leaving them damp at the hems. High above, a lark trilled its bright song, chasing after unseen insects rising from the crops. They soon set to work. Altan showed Dastan which section of wheat was ready. The stalks there were dry enough, the heads heavy with ripe grain that bent them downward. Father demonstrated the proper sweeping motion with the scythe, cutting a swath of stalks close to the ground in one smooth arc. Dastan followed alongside with his sickle, trimming the shorter edges and gathering the fallen stalks into small bundles. The rhythm of harvesting took over. Swing, rustle, sweep, gather. It was honest work, the kind that made muscles ache pleasantly and hearts content. Altan hummed a work tune under his breath as they moved down the row. Dastan, feeling a bead of sweat already forming on his brow, paused to straighten his back and took a deep breath of the cool air. The scent of cut grain was sweet. They weren't alone out here. In the next plot over, Mara could be seen guiding his ox-drawn plough through a patch of fallow ground, preparing it for next season's sowing. Another 2 fields down, a group of women, including Mara's wife Farida, were tending the village's communal vegetable garden, their voices and occasional laughter carrying on the breeze. The whole village was like an organism coming alive each morning, each person a vital part working in unison under the growing sunlight. As the sun climbed a little higher, Dastan noticed the soil at his feet. Where they had cleared the stalks, the earth showed dry cracks. He frowned and mentioned to Altan, "The ground is a bit parched, isn't it?" Altan paused, leaning on his scythe for a moment. He wiped his brow and looked down. "A little," he admitted. He knelt and crumbled a clod of dirt between his calloused fingers. The top layer was indeed quite dry, but a shade deeper it was still damp from the last irrigation. "We'll run some water from the stream this evening," he decided. "It'll moisten the field. The stream's been kind to us even without rain." At the mention of water, Dastan's gaze drifted toward a wooden windmill structure standing at the edge of their field. It wasn't large, just a modest windmill with canvas sails attached to a simple pump mechanism. The device creaked softly as a mild breeze turned its vanes. "That wind pump the engineers built for us has been helpful too," he noted. Altan smiled, following his son's look. "Indeed. That little marvel draws water up from the ground whenever there's a good wind. See how the channel there leads the water into the irrigation ditches?" Dastan observed the shallow channels crisscrossing their field, which carried water to the thirsty roots of the crops. The wind pump had been installed the previous spring by a traveling team of Tartarian engineers, a sign of how even small villages benefited from the Empire's knowledge. It used gears and a screw-like mechanism to lift water from an underground well whenever the wind turned its blades. The sound of gently trickling water could be heard now, as the morning breeze spun the windmill lazily, drawing up a steady, if small, flow. Technology harnessing nature, Altan mused aloud, patting the wooden post of the windmill as they passed by it. Our ancestors were clever, and so are the people of today. We're lucky to live in such times, eh? Dastan nodded with a grin. He felt a swell of pride thinking that in Tartaria, even farmers had such helpful inventions. Maybe one day I can learn to build something like this, he said, imagining himself as an engineer or inventor. Altan chuckled. Maybe you will. But for now, let's focus on this harvest, young inventor. They continued working through the morning. Under the strengthening sun, their pile of cut wheat grew steadily. Dastan's arms began to tire, but he refused to slow down. He wanted to prove himself useful. Sensing this, Altan called for a short break once they'd cleared a good section. They sat under the shade of a lone elm tree that grew at the corner of the field. From a leather flask, Altan poured cool water into a cup and handed it to Dastan, then poured another for himself. Dastan drank gratefully, the water reviving him. He looked out over what they'd accomplished so far, neat bundles of wheat lying in rows. It was satisfying to see the fruits of their labor. Altan flexed his shoulder and smiled at Dastan. I remember being about your age when my father first let me swing the scythe for harvest, he said, reminiscing. By midday I was so sore I could hardly move my arms. He laughed at the memory. Dastan grinned. It was rare to hear his father talk about himself as a boy. Did grandfather farm this same field? He asked, wiping sweat from his brow. He did, Altan replied, gazing over the golden expanse of wheat, and his father before him. This very elm tree, he patted the elm's bark fondly, was just a sapling when my grandfather worked these lands. Now look at it, big enough to shade us all. Time flies, son. One day you might be out here with your own children, telling them how you and I harvested together. Dastan felt a pleasant warmth at the thought. He admired his father greatly, and the idea of continuing the lineage of caring for the land gave him pride. If I do half as good a job as you, I'll be happy, he said earnestly. You'll do even better, Altan assured, ruffling Dastan's hair. Each generation does. That's the hope, anyway. Father and son shared a quiet smile, surrounded by the rustling hush of their field. Not far from the overlook of elm and hills, the caravan passed a small stone shrine built into the mountainside. A decades-old traveler's altar, adorned with faded prayer flags. Zira brought the wagons to a brief halt, and each traveler, following tradition, took a moment to bow their head or whisper a thank you at the shrine for safe passage. Dastan followed suit, silently grateful for their survival through the storm. He placed a tiny offering, a single copper coin, into the offering bowl at the shrine, as he had seen his parents do at the village temple back home. The copper glinted in the morning light alongside other tokens left by previous wayfarers, bits of grain, carved wooden charms, a dried flower. As they moved on, Dastan felt a comforting sense that their journey was blessed on this final stretch. By late morning, Altan and Dastan had harvested a large sheaf of wheat, enough for one day's haul. They tied the bundles with twine and loaded them onto a handcart to bring back to the barn for threshing later. The sun was nearing its zenith now, and its heat was growing in intensity. Dastan wiped his forehead with his sleeve. His shirt was sticking to his back. Time to head in for a bit, Altan announced, noting the position of the sun. They would resume more work in the late afternoon when the heat waned, as was custom. They trundled back to the yard with their cart full of golden stalks. In the yard, they saw that Layla had finished her morning tasks as well. She had milked the cow and goats. The full milk pails sat in the shade, covered with cloth to keep out flies, and she was now hanging up wet laundry on a line, shirts and linens fluttering white and clean in the breeze. Sophia was nearby, seated on a stool under the eaves, deftly weaving strips of dried reed into baskets, her contribution to the upcoming harvest storage preparations. Hearing the creak of the cart, Layla looked over and immediately fetched 2 bowls of cool buttermilk she had churned from the morning cream. She walked over to her husband and son, offering the refreshing drink. "Come, you two, have a sip and rest. You've both worked hard." Dastan accepted the bowl gratefully. The buttermilk was tangy and cool, sliding down his throat easily. It chased away the dryness of his mouth from hours of fieldwork. Altan drank deeply from his bowl, sighing in appreciation. "Thank you, my dear," he said to Layla, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Couldn't ask for a better sight than you and a cold drink after a long morning." Layla shook her head in amusement. "Flatterer," she teased. "Take those bundles into the barn, and then it's time for lunch. I have a stew warmed up." Dastan and Altan brought the wheat into the barn, laying it out to be threshed and winnowed in due time. The interior of the barn was dim and cool, smelling of hay and the sweet musk of farm animals. Their cow lowed a greeting at them from her stall, and the chickens clucked softly from their coop in the corner. Just as they finished storing the tools and bundles, an excited shout came from the lane in front of their house. It was one of the village boys, running and calling out as he went, "The traders are coming! The traders are coming!" Dastan emerged from the barn door, his eyes widening. Down the road that led into the village, he could see a couple of horse-drawn wagons in the distance and a small caravan of people walking alongside with packs. The traveling traders visited their village every few weeks, bringing wares from distant places, always a big event for the community. By now, the boy's call had others peering out of homes and fields. Dastan felt a thrill of anticipation. He loved market days. Altan appeared at his shoulder, carrying the now empty cart. He smiled at his son's eager expression. "Why don't you wash up a bit and get ready?" he suggested. "We'll go see what the traders have brought after lunch." Dastan nodded vigorously and rushed off to rinse the sweat and dirt from his face and hands at the well. His fatigue from the morning's labors was quickly replaced by excitement. Market day meant new faces, news from other towns, and perhaps a treat or two if they had goods to barter. As he splashed the cool well water on his face, Dastan's mind raced with curiosity. What news would the caravan bring from the wider world? Perhaps there would be stories from the capital city, or travelers from lands beyond the mountains. The thought made his heart quicken. He dried off and hurried to join his family for the midday meal, nearly bouncing on the balls of his feet. Beyond the cottage, he could hear the caravan's wheels creaking closer, and villagers beginning to gather in the central square. The quiet routine of the morning was about to give way to the bustle of trade and festivity. And for Dastan, each moment was filled with the promise of discovery. Act 3. The Caravan and the Call of Distant Horizons. By the time Altan, Layla, Dastan and Sophia made their way to the village's central square, the traveling caravan had already rolled in and set up for the market. The once quiet square was now bustling with energy. 2 colorful wagons, painted with swirling patterns of blue and green, stood at opposite ends of the square. Between them, traders had laid out woven rugs on the ground and arranged all manner of goods for display: bolts of cloth in vibrant dyes, gleaming copper pots and pans, sacks of grains and spices, and trinkets from far-off provinces. At one stall, a jeweler laid out strings of polished amber and turquoise beads that caught the sunlight, while at another, a potter stacked elegant glazed bowls in blues and greens. Villagers gathered eagerly around each merchant's spread, eyes wide at the offerings that had come from beyond their small world. Children wove through the crowds, giggling as they chased one another with sticks pretending to be swords, while older folks haggled gently over prices or traded news with the visitors. The air, which earlier had been tranquil, was now alive with a dozen conversations, bursts of laughter, and exclamations of delight. In one corner, a young minstrel had set up with a lute-like instrument, plucking lively notes that twined through the chatter. Dastan felt as if he'd stepped into another world, one far removed from the quiet of the fields. His senses were almost overwhelmed. The bright colors of silk scarves fluttering from a merchant's tent post, the rich perfume of spices, cinnamon, cardamom, pepper, mingled with the sweet scent of dried apricots and figs, the clink of metal cookware being unpacked, the snippets of strange accents from the traders who had come from afar. His heart pounded with excitement. One stall drew Dastan like a moth to flame. It belonged to a bookseller and mapmaker, a somewhat rare visitor to a rural market. A tall, thin man in a long cotton robe sat cross-legged behind a low table there, unrolling a beautiful painted map of Tartaria for an enthralled small crowd. The man's face was tanned from the road, and a pair of round spectacles perched on his nose. Despite the dust of travel on his clothes, his manner was gentle and scholarly. Dastan edged closer, eyes drinking in the map. He saw broad strokes of green for forests, brown for mountains, and curling lines of blue rivers. The man, Ilyas by name, as introduced by a sign propped up on a crate, was explaining to one farmer how far it was to the next big town to the east. With a slender finger, Ilyas traced a route on the map. 3 days by horse to reach Bolat to the east, good sir. See here, the road passes by 2 lakes. There's an inn by the larger lake, a good resting spot, he said, in a cultured but friendly voice. When that farmer moved on, Dastan mustered the courage to speak. "Excuse me, may I look at your maps?" he asked politely. Ilyas turned his keen eyes to the boy and smiled. "Of course, young friend. Do you like maps?" I've never seen one so detailed," Dastan admitted. "Is that the whole of Tartaria?" He pointed at the expansive parchment. From his village, just a tiny dot that Ilyas pointed out, the map sprawled outward, showing snow-capped mountains to the east, great rivers and plains, and cities marked with proud symbols. Dastan's gaze lingered on the biggest city drawn at the center of the map, marked by a star and tiny illustrations of towers, the imperial capital. "Yes, this is our empire," Ilyas said with a touch of pride. "All of Great Tartaria, drawn from the best records and my own travels. I update it as I go. Every year there's something new to add or change." Sophia had shuffled up behind Dastan and peered at the map as well. Her eyes found the capital city and grew misty. "So many memories in that place," she murmured to no one in particular. The mapmaker's ears perked. "You've been to the capital, grandmother?" "Oh, many years ago," Sophia chuckled. "I doubt I'd recognize it now with how it must have grown. But the heart of it, the grand square, the towers, those remain, I'm sure." Ilyas nodded warmly. "They do. In fact, the capital is preparing for a great festival soon. Perhaps you've heard? The Festival of 1,000 Lights, they're calling it. It will coincide with the harvest moon next month." At this, Dastan's heart skipped a beat. "The Festival of 1,000 Lights?" he echoed. He remembered grandmother's tale from the night before, the very same festival she had witnessed as a child. Sophia's face lit up. "So it is happening again? In a month's time?" Her voice quavered with emotion. "I never thought I'd hear of it again in my life." Ilyas smiled gently. "Yes, indeed. It's a rare event, only once every decade, when certain lunar signs align. The city will be decked out in lanterns and visitors will come from all corners of Tartaria to celebrate peace and prosperity." I was lucky enough to attend the last one as a young man. And this year, I'll be making my way back to see it once more, if fate is kind. Dastan could barely contain himself. To hear that the wondrous festival his grandmother described was not just a story of the past, but an impending reality. It felt like a door opening in the sky itself. His eyes shone as he bombarded Ilyas with questions. Will there be floating lanterns again? And people dancing in the streets? Do they still have the great statue in the plaza? Have you heard what new things they'll do this time? Ilyas laughed, the sound warm and indulgent. He clearly loved to see youthful enthusiasm. Slow down, slow down. Yes, the floating lanterns are a tradition. Thousands of them will be released. The dancers, the music. Even grander, I suspect. With each passing festival, they try to outdo the last. The statue of the winged horse still stands in the central square, polished and watching over every festival just as always. They say this time there will be a grand display of fireworks, rockets of fire that color the night sky, something our ancestors invented and have perfected in recent years. Dastan had heard of fireworks. Tiny ones had been used occasionally for New Year celebrations in their region, but he could hardly imagine what a grand display might look like over the imperial city. His mind spun, trying to picture it. Blooms of light and color exploding among the stars. Layla and Altan had now joined them at the map stall, drawn by the talk of the capital. They listened with interest, though Layla placed a protective hand on Dastan's shoulder, as if already sensing how this news was affecting her son. It sounds magnificent, Layla admitted, eyes wide at the description of the upcoming festival. Oh, it will be, madam, Ilyas said. He began rolling up the map carefully. We're fortunate to be living in such peaceful times to be able to hold festivals of this sort. Tartaria thrives and can celebrate its unity. Altan exchanged a thoughtful glance with Layla. In all my years, I haven't traveled farther than Bolat, he said quietly. The capital always felt like another world. And yet it is part of our world, Sophia said, patting her son's arm. Part of our Tartaria. It's good for us to remember we're connected to something bigger than just our village. While the adults spoke, Dastan's attention drifted across the square to another stall that caught his eye. On a table, there gleamed several objects of polished brass and copper, devices and trinkets. One particularly drew him, a small mechanical toy, a bird with silver wings. As he approached, the merchant, a jovial woman with sleeves rolled up to her elbows, clearly a tinkerer, saw his fascination. She picked up the bird, wound a key on its side, and set it down. To Dastan's delight, the little metal bird flapped its wings and emitted a tiny melodic chirp before waddling across the tabletop. He laughed in surprise. A few younger children clapped at the sight. Such playful devices were not common here. How does it do that? Dastan asked, enchanted. The tinkerer winked. Clockwork, my boy. Gears and springs. A bit of Tartarian ingenuity. She opened a panel on the toy's side to show the intricate insides, little cogs that turned and clicked. Dastan barely understood what he was looking at, but it filled him with wonder. We truly live in an age of marvels, came Ilyas's voice from just behind him. The mapmaker had wandered over, a cup of steaming spiced tea now in hand. He too watched the mechanical bird, its mechanism winding down, the chirping fading. Our ancestors lit the first lamps with the knowledge of the natural energies, and now we craft tiny birds of metal that can sing. Who knows what more you will see in your lifetime? Dastan looked up at the learned traveller. I wish I could see it all, he said earnestly. The cities, the inventions, the library you must have in the capital. Ilyas's eyes twinkled. The great library is indeed a sight. More books than a man could read in 100 years, collected from every era, and schools where the young learn from the wisest teachers. He paused, then added with gentle curiosity, "Have you had much chance to study, young one? Can you read and write?" Dastan straightened with a hint of pride. "Grandmother taught me my letters, sir. We have a few books in our village, mostly almanacs and a book of parables. I've read them all," he admitted shyly. At this, Ilyas beamed. "A reader! Excellent. There is knowledge to be found even in a small village, if one has the hunger for it. Isn't that so?" Sophia had joined them and placed a loving hand on Dastan's shoulder. "This boy would devour an entire library if given the chance," she laughed. "He's always been curious about the wider world." Layla and Altan approached now as well, having browsed another stall, where they traded some of their preserved fruits for a bundle of new linen cloth. Overhearing Sophia, Layla squeezed Dastan's shoulder gently. "He has, ever since he was little, asking questions about everything under the sun," she agreed, though her smile was somewhat wistful. Ilyas studied the family around the bright-eyed boy, noting the supportive grandmother, the proud yet cautious look in the mother's face, the thoughtful quiet of the father. He seemed to consider something, then reached behind his display to pull out a small leather-bound book. It was plain but well made, the pages edged in blue. He held it out to Dastan. "If you love reading, here is a gift," Ilyas said. "It's a collection of simple tales and fables from different parts of Tartaria. I compiled them myself." Dastan's eyes widened. "A gift? Truly?" Altan immediately started to protest, reaching for his coin pouch. "Sir, thank you, but we should pay." Ilyas held up his palm politely. "No payment. Consider it a trade for the pleasure of the company and conversation of such an eager young mind. It does my heart good to see curiosity alive in the next generation." Dastan accepted the little book with almost reverent care. The cover was soft under his fingers, and inside, handwritten lines in neat script danced before him. "Thank you," he breathed, deeply grateful. The rest of the market visit passed in a blur of fascination for Dastan. He followed his parents from stall to stall, helping carry their purchases. Some new seeds to try in the garden from a spice trader, a pair of sturdy shoes for Layla that a cobbler had for trade, a bolt of patterned cloth that caught Sophia's fancy. But his mind remained on the wonders he'd heard about. He found himself peppering Ilyas with more questions whenever the man was free. What is the imperial palace like? Massive and marble with gardens and fountains, came the answer. Do airships really exist? Some experimental dirigibles, yes, though they are not common. What languages do travelers speak? Ilyas astounded him by greeting him in 3 different tongues from distant lands. With each answer, the world seemed to grow larger around Dastan and the village a little smaller. It wasn't that he loved his home any less, but rather he felt an increasing pull, a call to experience the breadth of Tartaria beyond the familiar fields. As midday passed and the sun began its descent, the caravan traders started packing up their wares, satisfied with the morning's commerce. They would stay one night in the village to rest, then continue their journey. The villagers, too, trickled back to their homes with newfound treasures and plenty to talk about for days. Dastan walked home with his family, but his head was not in the clouds. It was beyond them, racing along imagined roads to the imperial city. He barely felt the weight of the linen and seed packets he carried. His mind was busy formulating a plan, or at least a fervent wish. Once back at their cottage, under the shade of the afternoon, the family gathered around the table to share a light lunch and to chat about the eventful market. Grandmother Sophia was poring over the patterned cloth she'd gotten, envisioning a new dress for Layla, perhaps. Layla was already discussing with Altan how to plant the new herb seeds near the fence. Altan polished the metal blade of a small hand plough he'd bartered for, pleased with its quality. Dustin, however, sat quietly, the little leather book of stories Ilias had given him clutched in his hands. He hadn't let it out of his sight. His heart thumped in his chest. He knew he should speak up now about what was on his mind, but he felt anxious. Finally, Sophia noticed his silence. "Penny for your thoughts, my boy?" she asked gently. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward him, warm, loving, encouraging. Dastan licked his lips. I want to go," he blurted out. Altan tilted his head. "Go? Go where?" "To the capital," Dastan said, voice trembling slightly with excitement and nerves. "With the caravan. To see the festival, and everything else." Layla inhaled sharply. She had sensed this was coming, and yet hearing it out loud made her heart flip. "Dastan, that's so far," she began slowly. "We've hardly ever been away from the village." "That's exactly why I want to go, Mother," Dastan pleaded, leaning forward. "All my life I've heard stories. From grandmother, from travelers. I want to see these things with my own eyes. The great city, the festival of lights, the library, the inventions." Altan put a hand on Layla's and spoke carefully. "Son, it's natural to be curious, but the journey to the capital is long and can be hard. It would take weeks of travel by caravan, and you're still young." "I'm 16, Dastan countered earnestly. "Grandfather went off to war when he was even younger than me." This was true, though that war was decades past. "We're not at war now, praise the stars," Sophia interjected. She looked at her grandson with pride and sorrow mingled, all the more reason perhaps to let the young explore. Layla's eyes brimmed suddenly with tears she had been holding back. "But what of school? What of work? We need him here, especially with harvest and—" "Mama," Dustin said softly, reaching for her hand, "I will only be gone for a time. The festival is in a month. I could travel there with the caravan and be back after, maybe a few more weeks. We've nearly finished most of the harvesting anyway, and Marat or the neighbors can help Father for a short while. I promise I'll return. I just feel I have to do this. I'll regret it forever if I don't at least try." Altan and Layla exchanged a long, searching look. This was the hardest part of parenting, recognizing when to hold on and when to let go. Altan's jaw tightened, but he nodded slightly. He understood the yearning in his boy, for he had felt a bit of it too in youth, but never had the chance. Sophia gave a watery smile and wiped her eyes. "I did always want him to see that festival," she said, voice quavering. "It would be like completing a circle started long ago." Layla closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, tears spilling over her cheeks now. She cupped Dastan's face between her hands. "My baby," she whispered. "You've grown so fast." Dastan felt his own throat tightening at seeing his mother cry. "I'll come back," he assured her again, squeezing her hands. "I promise, I will. And I'll bring back stories for grandmother and gifts for everyone." Layla managed a small laugh through her tears. "You'd better, or we'll send your father after you," she joked weakly. Altan sighed and laid a hand on Dastan's shoulder. "If we agree to this, you must listen well to the caravan leaders, follow their guidance, and stay safe. Do you understand? The world outside can be challenging." "I will, Father. I'll be careful and make you proud," Dastan said, standing a bit straighter. Altan pulled his son into a quick, tight hug. "You already make us proud," he murmured gruffly, emotion thick in his voice. It was decided then. Dastan could hardly believe it. A swell of joy and anticipation surged in his chest so strongly he felt he might lift off the ground. They hurried to make preparations, for the caravan would leave at first light the next day. Layla, practical even through her sadness, bustled about packing some provisions for her son. Flatbreads that would keep well, dried fruits and nuts, a carefully wrapped chunk of the family's precious hard cheese, and a skin of water. She added a small medicine pouch of herbs, Sophia's mixtures for stomach aches or fevers, just in case. As she packed, she quietly advised Dastan on every little thing, from how often to change his socks to remembering to say his prayers each night, as if trying to pass on a lifetime of motherly wisdom in one evening. Sophia slipped away to her chest of keepsakes and returned with a soft woolen cloak that had belonged to her late husband, Dastan's grandfather. Though a bit large on Dastan, it would serve him well for cold nights camping outdoors. "Your grandfather wore this on his journeys," she said, wrapping it around Dastan's shoulders. "May it keep you safe and bring you courage when you need it." Dastan hugged her, breathing in the comforting scent of home that clung to the garment. "Thank you, grandmother. I'll think of you every time I wear it." Outside, Altan spoke with Ilyas and the other caravan leaders, formally arranging for Dastan to travel with them. Ilyas graciously agreed to take the boy under his wing for the journey, promising to see him there and back safely. "He has a good head on his shoulders," Ilyas noted, patting Dastan's arm, "and I can always use an extra pair of hands to mind the mule and take notes for my maps." Night fell with a flurry of activity and emotions in the Bakiv household. Neighbors popped by to offer well wishes when they heard the news that young Dastan would be journeying with the caravan. It was quite the event for their small community. Marat brought over a bundle of travel snacks his wife insisted Dastan take. Farida herself gave Dastan a tight hug and made him promise to deliver letters she hastily wrote for two of her cousins living in a town en route to the capital. Finally, under the silver glow of the moon, Dastan found himself lying in his bed for the last time, for a while, staring at the ceiling with a heart so full he could hardly sleep. He was excited and nervous and sad to leave, and eager all at once. Above all, he felt grateful for his family's support, for the chance ahead. He clutched the little leather book of stories to his chest. Tomorrow, he would begin a grand adventure. In the quiet darkness of his room, Layla sat by Dastan's bedside for a few extra minutes, stroking his hair like she did when he was a little boy. "Remember, you carry our love with you wherever you go," she whispered. "I know, Mama," Dastan whispered back, reaching up to squeeze her hand in the dark. "And I carry mine with you all here." With that reassurance warming them both, Dastan finally drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, the last sleep before a new chapter of his life would dawn. Act 4. On the open road. Dawn broke on Dastan's departure day, with a soft golden light and a chorus of birds greeting the morning. The village that he had known every day of his life looked somehow different in this moment, both achingly familiar and yet already tinged with a sense of nostalgia, because he knew he would soon be leaving it behind for a time. In front of the Baikiev cottage, the caravan was making ready. The two wagons were loaded up once more, their wheels checked and greased. A stout brown horse named Talik was hitched to the lead wagon, snorting gently in the cool air. Ilyas's mule, a placid grey creature with wise eyes, stood patiently as sacks of grain and bundles of goods were secured to its pack saddle. Other travellers in the group were tightening straps, counting parcels, and exchanging farewells with those villagers who had come to see them off. Once again, Dastan's family hovered around him in these last moments before departure. Layla fussed gently with the strap of the satchel she had packed for him, making sure it sat comfortably on his shoulder. Altan double-checked that the water skin at Dastan's belt was full and tied securely. Grandmother Sophia pressed a small packet into his hand. Inside, he knew, were some herbs and a protective charm she had sewn from red cloth to ward off evil. "Keep this near, dear one," she said, closing his fingers over it. "And remember, every night will be under the same stars." "I will," Dustin promised, voice small with emotion. Uncle Marat and his wife Farida were there too, along with a handful of neighbors. They clapped Dastan on the back and told him to travel safe, to learn much, and to hurry home with his tales. The village elder, a grey-bearded man named Rustem, placed a rolled letter in Dastan's hand, a missive for a trade guild contact in the capital, and thanked him for delivering it. Dastan tucked it carefully into his satchel with a sense of responsibility. Finally, it was time. The sun's rim was just peeking over the hills, and the caravan leader, a kindly woman named Zira, who drove the first wagon, called out, "All aboard who are coming. We want to make good distance before the heat sets in." Dustin turned to his mother and father. Layla's eyes were already wet, despite the smile she bravely held. He embraced her tightly, feeling her tears dampen his shoulder and trying not to cry himself. "I'll be back before you know it," he whispered. "Be good, my son." "Stay safe," she managed to say, cupping his face and then kissing his forehead one last time. Altan wrapped Dastan in a bear hug next. "Make us proud and look after yourself," he said, voice gruff. He slipped a small knife in a leather sheath into Dastan's hand, one of his own tools, sharpened and polished. "For any practical needs on the road," he said. Dastan knew it was also for protection, though neither said it aloud. Sophia was last. The old woman was smiling through her tears. "Go with my blessing, child," she said, her hands on his cheeks in that familiar, comforting way. "And when you see those lanterns rise, think of me." "I will, grandmother, every moment," Dastan vowed. He hugged her frail form gently. With that, he hefted his travel staff, a sturdy stick Marat had carved for him, and climbed onto the back of the second wagon, where Ilyas sat holding the mule's lead. Ilyas gave him an encouraging nod and made space on the wooden bench. The caravan's small contingent, Zira on the front wagon, Ilyas and Dastan on the second, and 3 other travelers on foot, began moving out. The wagon wheels creaked, the horse snorted as it pulled, and the group passed slowly under the great oak tree by the village gate. Dastan twisted around for one last look. His family stood together in the road, waving. He committed the sight to memory, the cottage with smoke still curling from the chimney, the sunflowers along the fence, his father's arm around his mother's shoulders, grandmother raising her hand high, her silver hair catching the morning sun. The image grew smaller as the wagon rolled on until a bend of the road, and a stand of poplar trees finally took them out of sight. He faced forward then, swallowing the lump in his throat. The world ahead was unknown and vast, but he felt a thrill beneath his sadness. The road dipped down from the village and led them through fields of barley and wheat that sparkled with dew. Dastan realized this was the farthest he had ever been from home, just a mile out, and already it felt like new territory. As the caravan gained the main road, a pair of deer darted across in front of them, white tails flashing as they disappeared into a distant copse of trees. This elicited a laugh from Zira. "A good omen," she called back. "2 deer on the road at the start of a journey means safe travels, so they say." Ilyas chuckled and relayed a bit of lore to Dastan. The old caravan masters have a saying for everything. If a crow lands on your wagon, you'll have rain. If you pass a running deer, you'll have a smooth road. Dastan smiled, appreciating how even on the road there were signs to read and superstitions to mind, not so different from planting by moon phases or listening for owl calls as omens back home. They traveled at a steady pace through the morning. The road under the wagon wheels was a simple dirt path, rutted from years of carts but well trodden and leading westward. On one side stretched open plains where wildflowers painted the green with splashes of yellow and purple. On the other side, gentle hills rolled, dotted with groves of oak and birch. Occasionally, they passed a lone farmhouse or a cluster of huts, outlying hamlets where people paused in their work to wave at the passing caravan. Dastan drank in every sight. By late morning, they reached a crossroads marked by an old stone milepost. The carved letters on it indicated distances: 5 miles back to their village, 20 miles ahead to the next market town of Bahar, and much further to the capital beyond. They decided to rest there briefly. The only sounds were the trilling of cicadas in the grass and the creak of wood as Zira pulled the wagons under the shade of a broad sycamore tree near the crossroads. The travellers disembarked to stretch their legs. Ilyas fetched a water skin and offered Dastan a long drink. "How are you holding up, young one?" he asked kindly. "Very well," Dastan answered, cheeks flushed with excitement more than fatigue. He gazed down the road that led toward Bahar. Ribbons of dust from the wheels trailed behind them, and far beyond, he could almost make out the faint outline of buildings or a distant bridge in the shimmering air. "Is that Bahar ahead?" "It is," Ilyas affirmed, following his gaze. "We'll reach it by midday or just after, I reckon. It's larger than your village, a proper town with an inn and a market of its own." Dastan felt a flutter of anticipation at the thought of seeing a town. He had never been to Bahar, though he had heard of it in passing from traders. A proper inn. Perhaps he would see many new faces there. As they rested, one of the other travellers, a sturdy, middle-aged woman named Osai, brought out a small flute from her pack and began to play a lilting tune. The melody was cheerful and light, matching the mood of the bright morning. Dastan listened, tapping his fingers against his leg. It turned out Osai was a travelling weaver, going to the capital to sell her tapestries. Between tunes, she showed Dastan a sample of her craft, a beautiful piece of fabric with a design of cranes and clouds woven in gold and white thread. "If I'm lucky," Osai said, "I'll find a patron in the city who likes my work. It's been my dream to see my tapestries in a noble's hall." "They're incredible," Dastan said sincerely, admiring the intricate art. Yet another talent in this wide world, he thought, realizing how everyone he met seemed to have some unique skill or knowledge. After their short break, the caravan pushed on. By late morning, they crested a hill, and Dastan got his first true glimpse of Bahar below. It was indeed larger than his village. He saw a cluster of red-tiled roofs, a stone bridge arching over a blue river that cut alongside the town, and fields of golden mustard flower encircling the outskirts. A couple of windmills turned lazily on the far side, and even from a distance, the specks of people and carts moving in and out of the town gates were visible. Entering Bahar was an eye-opening experience for Dastan. The caravan joined a short queue of wagons at the gate, where a pair of town guards in simple uniforms waved each group through after a cursory look. Inside, the town's main street was lively with shops and stalls. Blacksmiths' forges rang with the sound of hammer on metal, and the smell of fresh bread from a bakery mingled with the less pleasant but honest smells of livestock. The caravan halted in the central square near a sparkling fountain where travellers commonly camped. Zira went to arrange some business at the trading guild, and Osai headed off to purchase supplies. Ilyas stayed with the wagons, and Dastan, sticking by his side, took in the sights. He saw children darting about, town kids, a bit more streetwise looking than those back home, and apprentices running errands with arms full of goods. A fruit vendor nearby was loudly advertising juicy melons. Ilyas bought 2 slices of melon from that vendor and handed one to Dastan. The fruit was wonderfully sweet and quenched Dastan's thirst. "Nothing like a refreshing treat on a hot day," Ilyas said. They didn't plan a long stop in Bahar. just enough to eat and water the animals. Still, Dastan was fascinated by everything. To him, Bahar's modest two-story buildings and busy shops felt like a bustling city, though Ilyas assured him it was a quaint town compared to what was ahead. After an hour's respite, the caravan regrouped and set out once more, crossing the stone bridge over the clear river as they departed Bahar. Dastan looked down to see his reflection in the rippling water and grinned. Here he was, crossing a real bridge in a town he'd never seen, heading further from home than ever before. The clatter of the wagon on the bridge stones, the sound of the river rushing below, it all thrilled him. Beyond Bahar, the landscape shifted. The flat plains gave way to gently rolling hills that grew taller as they went westward. By afternoon, they were surrounded by slopes terraced with vineyards. It was grape-growing country, and the scent of sun-warmed vines was heady in the air. Occasionally, they passed oxen pulling carts laden with purple grapes, heading toward Bahar. The wine harvest was in full swing here. The drivers of those carts waved and called out friendly greetings to the caravan, curious about the travelers' origins and destinations. One old man driving a grape cart even tossed a small bunch of grapes to Dastan as he rode by. "For the lad enjoying his first journey," the man said with a gap-toothed smile. Dastan caught the grapes and thanked him warmly, sharing the treat with Ilyas and the others walking near the wagon. The grapes were plump and burst with sweetness, truly a gift of the earth. The sun was lowering toward late afternoon when the caravan found a suitable place to camp for the night. They had made good progress on the road. Bahar was now far behind them, and the next city, though still distant, would be reachable by midday tomorrow at their pace. The chosen campsite was a grassy clearing beside a gentle stream, sheltered by a stand of cedar trees. Zira pulled the wagons into a circle, a precaution that any caravan took at night. Though the lands were peaceful, it was tradition to form a circle, as a makeshift corral, and to make any approaching visitors obvious. The animals were unhitched, and led to the stream to drink and graze. Dastan helped gather dry firewood for the evening campfire, eager to contribute. His legs were a bit sore from sitting all day, and stretching them with this task felt good. Soon, as twilight fell, a cheery fire crackled in the center of the camp. The travelers sat around on blankets and overturned crates, sharing a simple dinner. Layla had packed Dastan well. He offered around some of his mother's flatbread and cheese, which were gratefully accepted. In return, Zira opened a pot of spiced lentils she had cooked, and Osai handed out strips of dried mutton from her provisions. It became a potluck of sorts, each contributing, each enjoying a bit of the other's food. Under the emerging stars, the group exchanged stories to pass the time. Osai, the weaver, told a humorous tale about a mischievous fox that used to steal her yarn, making everyone chuckle. Zira recounted a memory of a sandstorm she once endured while crossing the far western deserts, how the air turned orange and one couldn't see a foot ahead until it passed. After the song, Zira cleared her throat and shared the tale of how the very shelter they occupied came to be. She spoke of a legendary caravan master named Toran, who, caught in a storm much like this one many years ago, saved his entire caravan by finding a similar rocky alcove. Come morning, Toran vowed that no traveler should face the mountain's fury without refuge, and he petitioned the Imperial Guild to build safe huts along these passes. "This hut is here because of Toran's promise," Zira said softly, patting the stone wall. The thought gave everyone a sense of gratitude, an unknown benefactor from the past, watching over them still. Grandmother Sophia's eyes grew distant as she drifted into a story. "I remember a festival of lights in the capital, many years ago," she began softly, her voice gaining a lilting cadence. "I was not much older than you, Dastan. My father had taken me along on a great journey, all the way to the imperial city. Oh, how dazzling it was." Sophia's gaze gleamed, reflecting the lamp's glow as she recalled the memory. While Osai's gentle flute and Zira's story made the night feel cozy, Dastan realized how tired he was from the day's excitement. One by one, the travelers began to turn in for the night. They tethered the animals securely close to the wagons. Dastan laid out his sleeping roll, a thick quilt Layla had given him, smelling faintly of home, in the wagon alongside Ilyas's gear. He took a moment to step away from the circle before sleeping, standing at the edge of the clearing to gaze at the night. The sky here seemed even wider than at home, an infinite dome of black velvet pricked by countless stars. Without the lamps of a village, the darkness was deep, and the stars burned bright and clear. He recognized some familiar constellations. There was the curved tail of the great tiger, and the three in a row that villagers called the Hunter's Belt. And there, shining steadily in the north, was the star grandmother called Arslan. Seeing it so high above, Dastan felt a gentle reassurance. They were indeed under the same stars, just as she said. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came Ilyas's low voice from a few paces behind him. The mapmaker had walked over quietly. He too looked upward. "Out on the plains or in the wilds, you can truly see the heavens unobstructed." Dastan nodded. "I don't think I've ever seen this many stars." Ilyas was silent for a moment, then pointed toward the northwest. "That hazy band there, that's the edge of our galaxy, reaching across the sky." "It looks like a river of light," Dastan whispered. "A river indeed. Our ancestors often called it the Sky River," Ilyas said. He then pointed due west, where a faint flicker of light glowed on the horizon, just over a distant hill. "See that? That's the lights of Sarai, a city we'll reach tomorrow. Even from here you can see the glow of its night fires." Dastan peered at the subtle luminance and felt a thrill knowing it came from the hearths and lamps of a city still many miles away. So much awaited him. They returned to the wagon and settled in to sleep. Dastan's body was tired from the day of travel and excitement, but his mind still buzzed for a while. He listened to the rustling of the wind in the cedars and the occasional stomp or whinny from the animals. These sounds gradually lulled him. Before he drifted off, he thought of home, picturing his family likely sitting around their hearth, perhaps speaking of him. He sent a silent goodnight to them across the distance. With that, on the first night of his journey, under strange skies, but with a familiar star shining above, Dastan closed his eyes and slept. Act 5. Trials under strange skies. The next days of travel carried the caravan into new and varied landscapes Dastan had only ever heard about. By the second evening since leaving home, they had moved beyond the gentle foothills and were ascending into a mountain pass that threaded between towering peaks. Patches of last winter's snow still clung in sheltered crevices near the peaks, and occasionally the distant cry of an eagle would pierce the silence. The higher they went, the thinner the air felt, and the more expansive the view grew behind them. The road here was narrower and rocky. Tall pines and fir trees flanked their path, filling the air with the crisp scent of resin. Far below in the valleys, Dastan could see patchwork squares of farmland, and the ribbon of the road they had travelled winding back into the distance. He marvelled at how far his feet and the wagon wheels had carried him in such a short time. On the third day, the weather began to change. As the caravan climbed higher, clouds gathered, thick and grey, clinging to the mountain tops. The air turned cooler and carried a hint of moisture. Zira eyed the darkening sky with some concern. "Looks like a storm brewing," she noted. By late afternoon, they were well within the highlands. A sheer cliff face rose to one side of the road, while on the other side a steep slope fell away into forested darkness below. The wind picked up, whistling through the crags with an eerie sound. They pressed on a bit faster, hoping to clear the most precarious part of the pass before the storm hit. Ilyas walked alongside the wagon now, to lessen the load on the mule as they ascended a steep stretch. Dastan walked too, stretching his legs and picking his steps carefully on the uneven ground. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing off the peaks. Fat raindrops began to splatter the dusty road, slowly at first. Zira called back, "Keep going. There's a traveller's shelter a mile or two ahead. We can ride out the weather there." The promise of a shelter spurred everyone on. But the mountain had other plans. With startling swiftness, the skies opened up. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching the travellers and turning the road to mud. A flash of lightning crackled not far off, illuminating the craggy outline of the peaks in stark white for a split second. "Storm's on us!" Osai shouted over the sudden roar of wind and rain. She had thrown her cloak over her tapestry bundles to protect them. "Head down! Keep moving!" Zira responded. The horse pulling her wagon whinnied in protest as thunder boomed overhead. Dastan's heart pounded. This was a fiercer storm than he'd ever been out in. Cold rain stung his face, and his cloak whipped about. He clung to the side of the wagon to steady himself, and cast a worried glance at Ilias. Ilias met his eye and gave a reassuring nod, though water streamed off the brim of his hat. "We'll be all right. The shelter's not far." Step by step, they trudged through the downpour. The road became slick, and small rivulets of water ran downslope, trying to tug their boots out from under them. At one point, the wagon wheel hit a hidden rut under the puddles and lurched. Dastan slipped, falling to one knee in the mud. Immediately, two strong hands caught him. One was Ilias's, the other Osai's. They hauled him up before the wagon could slide into him. "Thank you," Dastan gasped, wiping rain from his eyes. "Almost there," Zira shouted. She had to yell to be heard over the pounding of rain on the wagon covers and the thunder's cracks. Indeed, as they rounded a bend, Dastan saw a most welcome sight. A sturdy stone shelter built into the mountainside. It was little more than a single-room cabin with a large, overhanging roof, meant for travelers to take refuge. Such shelters were maintained by imperial decree along major routes, as Ilias had mentioned earlier. One of many ways Tartaria cared for those on the road. They guided the wagons off the path under the lee of the shelter's overhang. The travelers, soaked to the bone, hurried inside the stone hut. It was dry, mercifully, though chilly. Zira's horse and Ilias's mule were tied under the roof's eave, where they could at least avoid the driving rain, and the animals were draped with extra blankets to keep them warm. Inside, the shelter was dark, but dry. Osai quickly found the small stack of firewood kept there for travelers' use. With flint and steel, she and Ilias got a modest fire going in the stone hearth at the center. The room filled with the smoky, pine-sweet smell of the burning wood. Dastan sat close to the growing flames, shivering as the chill in his limbs began to retreat. Water pooled at his feet from his drenched clothes. Layla's wool cloak and the layers beneath had kept him from the worst of the cold, but he was certainly wet through. He took off his boots and squeezed out his socks, which made everyone laugh as he held the soaked wool up. Osai dug in her pack and produced a spare shirt, which she insisted Dastan put on, while his own dried by the fire. It was a bit large on him, but he gratefully accepted the warm, dry cloth. Meanwhile, Zira passed around a flask of strong tea, laced with herbs that she carried, to help everyone's warmth return. They could hear the storm raging just outside, rain hammering on the roof and ground, wind howling through the rocks. But inside the shelter, by the crackling fire, they were safe. To lift their spirits, Ilias suggested they share a song or story while waiting out the tempest. Osai, ever cheerful, began singing a common traveller's tune called "The Road and I." Her voice was low and soothing, and soon the others joined in quietly, even Dastan, once he caught the simple refrain. The song spoke of trust in the road, that every turn and fork leads to where one is meant to be. The music and hot tea worked their magic. Dastan felt his shivers subside, replaced by a warm drowsiness. He leaned against the stone wall, watching the firelight dance on the faces of his companions. Here he was, in a mountain hut, with near strangers who were fast becoming friends, singing while a storm raged outside, something he could never have imagined just a week ago. In a strange way, he felt completely content, cocooned by fellowship amid the wild elements. After the song, Zira cleared her throat and shared the tale of how the very shelter they occupied came to be. She spoke of a legendary caravan master named Torin, who, caught in a storm much like this one many years ago, saved his entire caravan by finding a similar rocky alcove. Come morning, Toran vowed that no traveller should face the mountain's fury without refuge, and he petitioned the Imperial Guild to build safe huts along these passes. "This hut is here because of Toran's promise," Zira said softly, patting the stone wall. The thought gave everyone a sense of gratitude, an unknown benefactor from the past, watching over them still. One by one, the travellers began to turn in for the night. They tethered the animals securely close to the wagons. Dastan laid out his sleeping roll, a thick quilt Layla had given him, smelling faintly of home. In the wagon alongside Ilyas's gear, he took a moment to step away from the circle before sleeping, standing at the edge of the clearing to gaze at the night. The sky here seemed even wider than at home, an infinite dome of black velvet, pricked by countless stars. Without the lamps of a village, the darkness was deep, and the stars burned bright and clear. He recognized some familiar constellations, like the curved tail of the great tiger and the three-star belt of the hunter. And there, shining steadily in the north, was the star grandmother called Arslan, still watching over him from afar. Seeing it so high above, Dastan felt a gentle reassurance. They were indeed under the same stars, just as she'd said. From the open doorway of the hut, Layla's voice called softly in memory. "Wherever you go in Tartaria, that star will guide you home." Dastan smiled and closed his eyes briefly. He offered a silent prayer of thanks for the storm's passing and for the family awaiting him beyond these peaks. Then he returned to the wagon and settled in to sleep, the patter of diminishing rain and the hush of the mountains lulling him into slumber. Act 6, City of Wonders. At long last, dawn broke on the day Dastan would enter the imperial city of Tartaria. The caravan departed the roadside inn early, wheels crunching along the main highway with a purposeful eagerness. A light mist hovered above the fields, gradually melting as the sun's rays strengthened. As they crested a gentle rise, the landscape beyond revealed itself, and there it was. Spread out before them in the distance was the capital city, Aurora, glimmering in the morning light. Dastan's breath hitched. Even from miles away, the city looked immense. He could make out the outline of towering walls encircling it, and rising from within, the silhouettes of domes and spires piercing the sky. "There she is," Ilyas said softly, eyes shining at Dastan's side. "Aurora, jewel of Tartaria." Dastan could only nod, speechless. As they rolled closer, more details emerged. The city wall was a marvel unto itself, an ancient fortification of pale golden stone, studded with bastion towers at intervals. The road led straight to a grand gate in the walls. Above the gate's arch, two monumental statues stood guard. On one side, a figure of a lion, symbol of courage. On the other, an eagle, symbol of wisdom, both carved in exquisite detail. By the time the caravan joined the queue of travelers awaiting entry, full morning had arrived. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the scene with a gentle warmth. All around them was the bustle of traffic converging on the city. There were merchants' wagons piled high with wares, Farmers with carts of fresh produce headed for market, a troupe of musicians on foot carrying lutes and drums, and even a contingent of imperial soldiers on horseback, returning from patrol. Voices mingled in 100 accents, and the sense of the goods in the air, spices, animals, fresh hay, created a heady tapestry of city life before they even passed through the gates. Dastan craned his neck, trying to absorb every fragment of this moment. Just outside the gate, he noticed, a cluster of children were gathered, cheering each time a new traveller arrived. Some of the more enterprising among them darted forward to offer services, shoe shining, directions, or help carrying bags, in exchange for a coin or two. Their laughter and energetic calls made Dastan grin. He could easily imagine himself in their place had he been born a city boy. At last, it was their caravan's turn to enter. The colossal iron-bound doors of the gate stood open, revealing a tunnel-like passage through the thick wall. A pair of city guards in polished cuirasses stepped forward to briefly inspect them. The guards' eyes glanced over the wagons and the travellers, lingering just a moment on Dastan, likely noting his wide-eyed wonder with a hint of amusement, before waving them onward. Passing under the archway, Dastan felt an uncanny shiver of excitement. The sounds of the outside world echoed off the stone around them for a few seconds. Hoofbeats, wagon wheels, a snatch of a traveller's song, until they emerged on the other side, into Aurora itself. The road spilled out into a broad avenue. For a moment, Dastan hardly knew where to look. The avenue was lined with buildings of a scale and grandeur beyond anything in his experience. Many were 3 or 4 stories tall, constructed of stone and marble. Some bore splendid portals, soaring pillars and intricate archways. Britannica.com. Others had balconies draped with flowering vines, and everywhere, people, so many people, bustled about. Citizens in tunics or dresses of every colour, traders pushing handcarts, children darting between pedestrians, and officials in modest uniforms directing the flow of carts. High above, spanning the avenue at regular intervals, were graceful arches hung with banners to welcome visitors for the upcoming festival. Dastan recognized the symbol emblazoned on the banners, a golden sunburst with 1,000 tiny rays. It was the official emblem for the Festival of 1,000 Lights, and seeing it flutter in the breeze made his heart skip. Grandmother's festival, the one he had dreamed of, was truly near. Zira guided the wagons expertly through the throng, calling out, "Mind the cart, please," with a good-natured tone whenever a stray pedestrian crossed their path. Their first destination was a caravanserai not far from the gate, a large courtyard and stable area where merchants could park their wagons, stable animals, and rent storage or rooms. It was a hive of activity itself, with stable hands rushing to and fro, tending horses and camels, and clerks checking inventories for new arrivals. Once inside the caravanserai, Zira drew the wagons into an assigned bay, under a long, terracotta-tiled shed. The journey was officially complete. They spent the next hour unloading what needed unloading and settling accounts. Osai was heading directly to the weaver's bazaar with her tapestries, so the group helped her transfer her precious rolled cloths to a hired cart. Amid hugs and well wishes, she departed, promising to meet again in a few days at the festival's opening ceremony. "This is where we part ways for now," Zira said to Ilyas and Dastan as she secured her own wagon. She would remain at the caravanserai to handle trade business for a couple of days. The woman clasped Dastan's hand firmly. "It's been a pleasure traveling with you, young man. Take in everything this city offers, all right? And mind what you learned on the road." "I will, Zira. Thank you for everything," Dastan replied sincerely. Zira winked. "If you need anything, you know where to find me. The gates of Aurora might be big and grand, but remember, you've always friends here." With those parting words, Zira left to check on her horse and cargo, and Ilias beckoned Dastan to follow him. "Come, let's find lodgings, and then I'll show you around. I suspect you're eager to see certain places," he teased lightly. "The library," Dastan blurted out with a grin. "And the big plaza. And everything." Ilias laughed. "In due time. We have a full day ahead." They found a modest inn on a quieter side street for their stay. The Mapmaker's Rest, it was called, to Ilias's amusement. "It seems I chose the right profession," he joked as they secured a room. The inn was a humble building of whitewashed brick with blue shutters, run by a kindly older couple. After stowing their packs and taking a brief moment to freshen up, Dastan splashed his face and changed into a clean tunic, wanting to look presentable in the city. They stepped back out into the streets, ready to explore. Walking through Aurora was like walking through a living tapestry. Every street they turned onto presented new sights and sounds. On one narrow lane paved with smooth flagstones, Dastan watched an artisan painting intricate floral designs on ceramic vases outside his shop, humming to himself as he worked. On a broader street, they encountered a small parade of acrobats practicing for festival performances, young men and women balancing on each other's shoulders in astounding pyramids, while a crowd clapped along. Dastan could hardly clap. He was too busy gawking upwards at the acrobats flipping and twirling. All the while, the backdrop to these scenes was the city's architecture and the faint hum of energy that seemed to permeate it. Many main thoroughfares had tall iron lampposts at intervals, topped not with flame lanterns, but with glass globes. Even in daylight, Dastan noticed some glowing softly, a testament, Ilias pointed out, to the city's advanced power network, drawing from the central generators and the famed lightning towers that harvested atmospheric electricity. Remembering the gentle white glow of the lamp orb in his own village home, Dastan felt a swell of pride. Here was that same knowledge, magnified to illuminate entire streets. Before long, the pair arrived at a broad plaza that took Dastan's breath away. "This is the Plaza of the Meridian," Ilias announced. It was a gigantic square at the very heart of the city. The ground underfoot was laid out in geometric patterns, with polished stones of different colors. Ringing the plaza were some of the capital's most important buildings. To the north stood the imperial palace gates. The palace itself rose behind, a vision of domes and gardens glimpsed beyond a gilded fence. To the east, Dastan saw an immense temple with a sapphire blue dome, the great temple of the sun. To the south was a structure that made Dastan's heart thunder, a grand building with multiple domes and archways, all in white marble and stained glass windows, the Imperial Library and Archives. Even across the busy plaza, Dastan could see scholars and visitors ascending its marble steps. At the top of a column by the library entrance perched a sculpted owl, wings outstretched, symbolizing knowledge. "We'll save the palace for later," Ilias said, following the boy's gaze around the square. "I suspect I know where you'd like to go first." Dastan could only smile widely and quicken his pace toward the library. Crossing the plaza, he noticed in the center a tall obelisk with carvings on each side. Crowds flowed around it as around a tiny island. "That marks the center of the empire," Ilias explained as they passed, "engraved with the names of cities in each direction and their distances. See, there's your village name." They paused briefly, and Dastan indeed spotted his distant home etched in the stone among hundreds of others. It made him feel both small and connected all at once, a part of this great whole. At the foot of the library staircase, they stopped to take it in. Enormous doors of carved wood stood open, and above them was an inscription in flowing Tartarian script. "Knowledge is the light of the mind." People streamed in and out, scribes carrying stacks of books, students chattering excitedly, elders strolling with hands clasped behind their backs. Climbing the stairs, Dastan's stomach fluttered. He was actually entering the greatest repository of knowledge in Tartaria. Inside, the library's grand foyer opened under a soaring dome. The hush was noticeable. After the lively noise of the plaza, the air here felt reverent and calm. Sunlight poured in through the stained glass windows high above, painting gentle patterns of color on the polished floor. Rows of marble columns flanked the hall, and between them stood statues of philosophers and poets from ages past. Dastan inhaled the scent of old paper and ink, a perfume sweeter than any flower to him. He could see halls branching off in multiple directions, lined with more books than he could fathom. Ilyas guided Dastan through a few sections, pointing out, "There are the historical archives. Over there, the natural sciences wing. And this is one of my favorites, the maps and geography section." Dastan found himself in a gallery whose walls were adorned with giant maps of the known world. One map, nearly floor to ceiling, depicted Tartaria and all surrounding continents in stunning detail, complete with painted illustrations of ships in the seas and creatures in the corners representing the winds. He recognized Ilyas's style on some of the charts. Unsurprisingly, the mapmaker had contributed to this trove. Dastan felt a surge of inspiration. One could spend a lifetime learning here and never exhaust it. At one table in the map section, a group of schoolchildren, perhaps apprentices, were gathered around an elder teacher who was explaining the art of navigation. Dastan and Ilyas paused to listen for a moment as the teacher demonstrated how to use a device called an astrolabe to measure the height of the sun. Dastan realized there was so much he didn't know, but far from feeling discouraged, he felt excited. Each unknown was like a door he itched to open. They continued on. In a quieter alcove, Ilyas showed Dastan some of his favorite old manuscripts. One was an illuminated chronicle of Tartaria's early kings, the pages edged with gold leaf and vibrant miniatures of battles and coronations. Another was a thick compendium on astronomy, complete with star charts that folded out, drawn centuries ago by a scholar who, according to Ilyas, charted the stars from a mountaintop with only an astrolabe and boundless patience. Dastan gingerly traced a finger above, not touching, one such star chart, marveling at the precision of the constellations drawn. He recognized the hero's belt and the North Star that grandmother loved. A pang of emotion hit him unexpectedly. How he wished she could see this place. How she would love it. Noticing the boy's misty eyes, Ilyas put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Homesick?" "A little," Dastan admitted quietly. I think of how grandmother would love this library. I hope one day I can bring her a book from here, or tell her all about it." "You will," Ilyas assured him. "The knowledge you gather here, you'll carry back to share. That's how wisdom spreads like light, Dastan nodded, comforted by the thought. They spent a good part of the late morning in the library. Ilyas could easily have spent all day, he joked, but he didn't want to overwhelm Dastan. Before leaving, the librarian Maris kindly allowed them up to one of the quiet balconies where few visitors went, for a bird's-eye view of the main hall. From there, Dastan beheld the library's full grandeur, the patterned marble floor, the endless shelves radiating outward, the great dome above painted with a mural of scholars receiving knowledge from the heavens. His heart swelled with gratitude and amazement. On their way out, Maris pressed into Dastan's hands a small book as a token. "It's a beginner's guide to the history of Aurora," she whispered with a wink. "I give these to young visitors. Consider it a memory of your first day here." The slim volume was beautifully bound in indigo cloth. Dastan accepted it as if it were a treasure beyond price. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered back, his smile reaching ear to ear. Stepping back into the plaza at midday, The city greeted them with bright sun and a lively hum of activity. The aromas of street food wafted by, roasted nuts, spiced meats on skewers, and sugary confections. Dastan's stomach rumbled. He realized he was hungry. In the excitement of the morning, he had hardly noticed. Ilyas laughed softly and led him to a row of food stalls along a colonnade at the plaza's edge. There, they bought hot, flaky meat pastries, called samsa, stuffed with minced lamb and onions, and 2 cups of cool, fermented mare's milk, kumis, to wash it down. They sat on a bench in the shade of a date palm to eat. As Dastan bit into the samsa's flaky crust and savory filling, he closed his eyes in bliss. "This is delicious," he murmured between bites. "Nothing like street food in the capital," Ilyas agreed, sipping his kumis. The drink was tangy and refreshing after the rich pastry. They spent the early afternoon wandering more of the city's districts. Ilyas took Dastan through an artisan's quarter, where metalsmiths and carpenters had their workshops open to the street. Dastan watched a silversmith delicately hammer out a filigree bracelet and a toy maker carving a wooden horse for a wide-eyed little girl. In a music shop, a luthier plucked the strings of a newly crafted dutar, a long-necked lute, tuning it with a practiced ear. The melody he tested was soft and mellifluous, and Dastan found himself pausing at the door just to listen a moment. "Go on, have a closer look if you like," the luthier encouraged, noticing the youth's interest. He even let Dastan hold the dutar for a moment, guiding his fingers in, plucking a simple scale. The instrument resonated with a gentle warmth. Dastan handed it back with thanks, marveling at the generosity of strangers in this big city. As the sun inclined toward late afternoon, Ilyas suggested they visit the great temple for a short prayer or reflection, since they had seen so much of the secular side of Aurora. The temple's public visiting hours were nearing end, but they managed to slip inside the vast sanctum just as the last few visitors were offering candles. Inside the Temple of the Sky, often just called the Sun Temple, Dastan felt a familiar serenity akin to being in nature. The high dome above was fitted with panels of colored glass, and now, in late daylight, beams of golden light cascaded down, giving the impression of sunlight magnified. Priests in simple white robes tended to enormous candelabras and arrangements of flowers along the altar. A few choristers were practicing off to one side, their voices echoing in ethereal harmony through the cavernous space. Dastan and Ilyas knelt and bowed their heads in silence for a moment. The boy whispered a thank you for their safe journey, for the opportunity to see all this, and for the family he loved. He hoped in that moment that his parents and grandmother perhaps felt his gratitude, though they were far away. The temple's silence felt alive and comforting, as though unseen, benevolent eyes watched over them. When they stepped out of the temple, evening was approaching, and the sky had begun to glow in shades of amber. Ilyas noted how tired Dastan looked. Though the boy insisted he was fine, his feet were indeed aching from all the walking. They decided to make their way back toward their inn, taking a leisurely route through a park that lay between the palace and the merchant quarter. The park was a lush expanse of green, with pathways lined by orange trees and jasmine bushes, whose sweet fragrance perfumed the cooling air. Families strolled here, and children chased each other in games of tag. Dastan and Ilyas found an empty bench by an ornamental fountain whose waters sparkled in the sunset. They sat for a while, resting their legs and watching the evening unfold. Lantern lighters began making their rounds along the park lanes, though many street lamps ignited automatically with the city's wireless energy system. The old-style lanterns in the park were lit by hand for tradition's sake. Dastan smiled, remembering how he'd help his father light the single oil lamp at home some nights. Here, dozens of lamps came alive one by one, their reflection twinkling in the fountain pool. "It's all so beautiful," Dastan said softly. "I feel like I'm in a dream." Ilyas shook his head kindly. "It's no dream. Aurora is very real. And you, my friend, are living every bit of it. How do you feel? Overwhelmed?" Dastan considered. "At first, yes. But now, I feel inspired, like I want to learn more, see more. Maybe one day I could study here, or something. I'm not sure what exactly, but I don't want this to be the only time I visit." Ilyas chuckled. "The city does tend to capture hearts. But it's wise to also remember the simpler joys of home. After a while, even this hustle and grandeur can weary the spirit. Balance is key." Night settled gently over Aurora. The first stars peeped out. Dastan automatically looked for Arslan, the hero star, and found it twinkling above the now illuminated cityscape. Ilyas and Dastan rose from the bench and made their way back to the Mapmaker's Rest Inn, both pleasantly exhausted. Over a light supper at the inn's little dining room, they recounted the day's highlights to the curious innkeepers. Dastan shyly shared how awestruck he'd been by the library's size, and the innkeepers nodded knowingly. Many visitors had said the same. Finally, upstairs in their room, Dastan prepared for bed. His body felt the ache of a day well lived, but his mind hummed with memories and thoughts. By the soft light of a bedside candle, he pulled out a piece of paper. Maris had given him a few sheets along with the gift book after noticing his interest in writing, and decided to pen a letter to his family. He wrote about arriving safely, about the splendid city gates and the kind people he'd met, about the library. "You wouldn't believe how many books, grandmother," he scribbled enthusiastically, "and the delicious foods he tried." He promised to tell everything in detail when he returned, and he hoped all was well at home. Ilyas, sitting by the window reviewing his own notes of the day, offered to ensure the letter would be delivered via the postal riders in the morning. Dastan sealed it carefully, heart full, as he imagined his family reading his words soon. That night, as he lay in a real bed, comfortable and feather-soft compared to his pallet on the wagon or the ground rolls of the journey, Dastan reflected on how much had happened in such a short time. Under the same night sky, he felt an invisible thread connecting this bustling city room back to his quiet village, tying together his two worlds. With a content sigh, he whispered a good night to Aurora, which had welcomed him so generously, and to his loved ones far away, whose love had carried him here. He fell asleep almost immediately, the images of towering domes, marble halls, and golden lantern light drifting through his dreams like gentle phantoms. Act 7. Echoes of Celebration. The days leading up to Aurora's grand festival passed in a blur of wonder and activity for Dastan. Each morning he awoke to the distant sound of bells and the rising energy that gripped the city. Preparations for the Festival of 1,000 Lights intensified with each passing day, and Dastan often found himself swept up in the excitement. Ilyas had his own duties to attend to, delivering updated maps to the guild, consulting with scholars who sought his cartographic expertise. So during certain afternoons, Dastan roamed parts of the city in the company of new acquaintances. One such friend was Tarin, the son of the innkeepers at the Mapmaker's Rest. Tarin was about 14, quick-footed and friendly, with bright hazel eyes full of curiosity. Charged with running errands around the city for his parents, Tarin happily took Dastan along, acting as a local guide. Under Tarin's guidance, Dastan got to peek behind the scenes of Aurora's festival preparations. They dashed through side streets and markets, Tarin explaining shortcuts and local secrets as they went. In the mornings, they watched teams of workers stringing colorful lanterns across every main avenue, hundreds upon hundreds of lanterns of painted paper and glass, ready to be lit on festival night. Some artisans were still applying final touches to particularly large lanterns, shaped like lotus blossoms and stars. "Every district makes their own," Taran explained, as they paused to admire a cluster of lanterns depicting prancing horses along one street. "There's a friendly competition for which will be the finest." They spent one bright afternoon at the riverfront, where a ceremonial barge was being decorated with flowers and ribbons. It was tradition, Taran said, for a flotilla of tiny boats carrying lanterns to be released on the river at dusk during the festival. Dastan helped weave a few white jasmine garlands, as he had seen his mother do for village celebrations, to contribute to the barge's decor. The organizer, a kindly old boatman, thanked the boys with small honey candies for their efforts. Every evening, as twilight fell, musicians practicing for the festival would take to the streets. One sunset, Dastan and Taran joined a gathering in a public square where a troupe of drummers and flutists rehearsed their performance. The air thrummed with the deep heartbeat of drums while flutes trilled an upbeat melody above. Children from the neighborhood clapped in rhythm. Dastan found himself clapping and swaying too, laughter bubbling up inside him. For the first time since leaving home, he felt entirely carefree. In quieter moments, Dastan thought of his family. He had sent off his letter home with the Imperial Post Riders, and though no reply could reach him so quickly, he hoped his words brought them comfort. Standing amid Aurora's splendor, he sometimes wished they could all be here together to share in it. Yet, he took solace in knowing he would bring back stories and perhaps even a few gifts. With the few coins he had, Dastan purchased small presents: a silk scarf the color of dawn for his mother, a carved wooden horse for his father, to replace one that had broken long ago, and for grandmother Sophia, a packet of fine tea leaves and a slim book of city poems he found at a market stall. He knew she cherished poems and would delight in reciting new verses. On the eve of the festival, Aurora felt as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. By city decree, work in offices and shops halted early so that people could turn their attention fully to the celebration. Taran and Dastan spent that twilight on the inn's rooftop, along with Taran's family, laying out lamps and a platter of traditional festival sweets. From that vantage point, they could gaze across the rooftops of Aurora as darkness gently fell. All at once, on the streets below, torches and street lamps were lit in unison by the city's lamplighters and the automatic systems. A collective murmur of appreciation rose from every quarter as the city began to glow. From their rooftop perch, Dastan saw the great domes of the Imperial Palace and temple illuminated by floodlights. The thousands of hanging lanterns now twinkled in long strands above the avenues like earthly stars. By custom, the night before the main festival day was one of family gatherings and calm reflection, for tomorrow would be filled with merriment. The innkeeper's family shared this quiet rooftop moment with Dastan and Ilias. They passed around cups of warm spiced milk and small date cakes. Taran's mother softly hummed a festival lullaby, an old melody meant to bless the lanterns being lit. Dastan closed his eyes, letting the gentle tune wash over him. It reminded him of Sophia's humming back home, and unexpectedly, his chest ached with a mix of happiness and longing. How proud his grandmother would be to see him, under these glowing aurora skies, living the stories she had told. Ilias seemed to sense Dastan's emotion, for he gave the boy a reassuring pat on the back. "Thinking of home?" he whispered. Dastan nodded, wiping a single happy tear that had escaped. "I just wish they could see this." "They will, through your eyes and words," Ilias replied softly. "Your experiences now will become their memories too when you share them." Late that night, Dastan found sleep elusive. Excitement for the festival day ahead danced in his mind. In the inn's courtyard below, he could hear distant laughter and the faint strains of music as some neighbors played a gentle song on a flute before bed. He leaned out his small window to breathe in the cool night air. Aurora was mostly quiet now, the calm before the grand celebration. Far off, from the direction of the main plaza, a sudden burst of tiny lights flared and disappeared. Some early fireworks someone tested briefly, painting a momentary silver shimmer against the dark. Dastan smiled and whispered a prayer of gratitude for everything that had brought him here. The twist of fate that allowed him to come, the kindness of strangers who'd guided him, and the love of his family that fueled his courage at every step. Tomorrow, he would witness the festival of 1,000 lights, a dream born of Sophia's tales, now to be reality. "Thank you," he murmured to the night, unsure if he addressed the ancestors, the city, or perhaps just life itself. Then he withdrew into his cozy room, heart brimming with anticipation for the wonders the next day would bring. Act 8. Night of 1,000 Lights. The festival of 1,000 lights arrived in a blaze of glory. From the first light of dawn, Aurora was transformed into a realm of celebration. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, every lantern strung across the city was ignited. Thousands upon thousands of them kindled to life, points of warm glow that mirrored the stars emerging in the velvet sky above. Dastan stood with Ilyas, Tarin and Tarin's family in the plaza of the Meridian amid a sea of joyous citizens. In his hands, he carefully held a paper lantern painted with the image of a soaring lion, a design grandmother Sophia had once described from her memory. Around him, the plaza was awash in color and light. Children laughed and chased each other with tiny lanterns on sticks. Couples strolled arm in arm under the luminous arches, and elders watched from benches with content smiles. The great statue at the center of the square, the winged horse, had been wreathed in garlands of marigolds and shone under the lantern light like a beacon of peace. When the great bronze bell of the imperial palace tolled a deep note, signaling the height of night, all festivities paused for a breath. An expectant hush fell over Aurora. Dastan felt his heart pounding. This was the moment he had dreamed of, the moment grandmother had told him about so long ago by their hearth. A voice rang out over the plaza, amplified by some clever acoustic. The city's chief steward, announcing the commencement of the lantern release. All eyes turned upward. At the edges of the square, volunteers stood ready, with torches. At the signal, they touched flame to the wicks of hundreds of sky lanterns, delicate orb-like balloons made of oiled silk. One by one, each lantern's small flame filled it with hot air, and these began to rise. Gasps and cheers erupted as the first dozens, then hundreds, then 1,000 glowing orbs lifted into the night. Dastan tilted his head back, mouth open in pure wonder. The lanterns ascended like a new constellation, drifting lazily upward. They gleamed in colors of gold, red, and white. The crowd's faces, illuminated by the gentle radiance, were filled with awe and tears of joy. Dastan's own lantern, his offering, was among them. He had carefully lit it and let it go with a silent wish. A prayer of thanks for this moment, and a wish for his family's well-being. As it floated away, he imagined Sophia's eyes shining with pride. Music rose into the air. An orchestra stationed on a balcony overlooking the plaza began to play the festival song, a graceful melody carried by strings and flutes. People embraced, strangers and friends alike caught up in the unity of that magical sight. Tarin whooped aloud, unable to contain his excitement, and Dastan laughed, the sound spilling from him freely. In that moment, he felt truly weightless, his spirit soaring alongside those lanterns. Fireworks followed, brilliant flowers of fire that burst against the darkness in showers of sparkles. The crowd oohed and ahed as each explosion painted the sky with blues, greens, and silvers. Dastan had never seen anything like it. The earth trembled softly with each burst, and with each one he felt a warm tremor in his chest, resonating with the collective delight of thousands around him. In the midst of this euphoria, as Dastan lowered his gaze from the heavens to catch his breath, his eyes found Ilyas. The mapmaker had tears on his cheeks, reflecting the lantern light. He placed a hand on Dastan's shoulder and simply said, "Your grandmother would be so proud." "I know," Dastan replied softly, his voice full of emotion. For a long time, the festival continued into the night. Music, dancing, endless streams of laughter and conversation. Dastan reveled in every second, storing each sensation in his heart to share with those back home. It was everything Sophia had described, and more. A living dream that he had now witnessed with his own eyes. When at last the celebrations wound down in the early hours of morning, Aurora gradually fell into a gentle slumber, lanterns still glowing softly in the alleys and doorways. Dastan walked back to the inn with Ilyas under a canopy of lingering stars and the last drifting lanterns. He felt utterly fulfilled. Yet fate is a wheel that turns even at the height of joy. The very next day, as Dastan sat with Ilyas over breakfast in the inn's common room, a messenger arrived bearing a letter sealed with the mark of his village's council. Dastan's hands trembled as he broke it open, sensing from the unexpected arrival that something was amiss. His eyes raced over the words. With each line, his breath caught harder in his throat. The summer back home had been cruelly dry. Wells were failing, and the crops were withering. His father wrote that the village had done all it could, but without substantial rain or new water sources, they feared for the autumn harvest, and for their very survival through winter. The tone was urgent, but hopeful that perhaps the wise men of the capital might have advice or aid. Dastan felt the room tilt slightly as he finished reading. The joy of the festival night still glowed in him, but now it was joined by a rising determination and worry. These were his people, his family, in need. Though he was just a boy, he had seen and learned much on this journey. Perhaps, he thought, there was something he could do, some knowledge or tool he could bring that might save his home. "I have to go," he whispered, meeting Ilyas's concerned gaze. "They need me. I have to go back and help." Ilyas nodded gravely. He did not try to dissuade the boy with platitudes. He too had grown fond of Dastan's village through the boy's stories. "We will find a way," he said firmly. "Gather your things. I'll arrange transport as far as I can for you." They spent the rest of that day in swift preparation. Ilyas took Dastan to the Imperial Guild of Engineers, where, upon hearing of the village's plight, a sympathetic clerk provided Dastan with a set of illustrated plans for constructing a simple windmill-driven water pump, much like the one Dastan had seen on his journey, and a small toolkit of essential instruments, a compass, a folding measuring rod, and a sturdy hand auger for well drilling. These were gifted as aid to a citizen in need. The Empire did not abandon its rural folk, the clerk said. By sunset, Dastan found himself atop a fast postal carriage heading east out of Aurora. Ilyas had secured him passage with the postal service, whose swift horses would far outpace a regular caravan. Before departure, Ilyas clasped Dastan's hands and looked him squarely in the eye. "You have grown so much in spirit since the day I met you. Use what you've learned, trust your courage, and you will succeed. We will all be praying for rain." "Thank you for everything," Dastan managed, his throat tight with gratitude and sorrow at parting. They embraced briefly. Then the carriage driver sounded the horn. With a final wave, Dastan was off, barreling through the night with 2 strong horses and a heart full of resolve. The journey home was a mirror of his journey out, but compressed by urgency. Days and nights blurred as the carriage sped along well-known roads. The mountains that had once loomed threateningly were crossed with determined speed, the weather mercifully calm this time. As they passed villages, Dastan could see the signs of drought even here, creeks running low, fields tinged brown. It wasn't just his home. Many places suffered under the cloudless sky. He arrived at his village on a clear morning, exactly 2 weeks after the festival. As the postal carriage rolled into the familiar dusty lane, Dastan jumped off before it even halted, feet hitting the ground running. His mother was the first to see him. She had been at the well with the bucket, and at the sight of her son she dropped it, water splashing unheeded onto parched earth. "Dastan!" she cried, half in joy, half in the release of weeks of worry. In an instant, she was embracing him fiercely. His father and Sophia and neighbors came rushing at the commotion. Tears and laughter mingled as they welcomed him home. Though he smiled, Dastan was struck by how tired and sun-beaten they looked, signs of the struggle they'd been facing. There was little time to waste. Almost immediately, Dastan called the village elders and able folk to gather in the meeting hall. There, he spread out the engineer's plans under the dim light. With calm confidence, the boy who had listened in Aurora's halls of knowledge now spoke as a leader. He explained how they could build a windmill-powered pump to draw water from deeper beneath the ground. He showed them the concept of digging a new well at a spot just north of the village, one the engineer's map indicated as a possible underground spring-fed source. He demonstrated, with the tools he brought, how they could bore deeper than before and line the well shaft with stone to prevent collapse. The elders listened, first with astonishment at this transformed Dastan, and then with growing hope. His father's proud gaze never left him. Grandmother Sophia quietly wept, tears of pride, of seeing the fruition of all those stories inspiring action now. Work began that same day. Despite exhaustion from his travels, Dastan led the way to the dry riverbed beyond the village, where the ground was damp when dug down, a promising sign of water below. In the searing heat, the villagers labored as a team like never before. They dug deeper than their old wells, using the hand auger to break through stubborn clay. Days passed in hard toil. Dastan was in the thick of it, face streaked with dirt, shoulders aching, but refusing to rest more than a few hours at night. At the same time, another crew assembled the windmill pump, from Ilyas's blueprints, fashioning blades from timber and canvas. Every household contributed something: wood, labor, rope, or simply cooking meals for the workers. It was as if his return had sparked a fire of determination that spread to all. On the third day, close to dawn, the well diggers hit a gush of water. With a great spurt, muddy liquid surged up from the earth as the villagers cheered. They hadn't seen water rise like that in a long time. Dastan, standing waist-deep in the new well shaft, laughed out loud as cool water soaked him. It was the sweetest feeling, like the land itself giving them a congratulatory pat. They reinforced the well with stones and mortar and erected the windmill overhead. When a breeze picked up by mid-morning, the wooden blades creaked into motion. Sure enough, the mechanism began to draw water up in a steady flow, filling the troughs and buckets waiting nearby. A cry of triumph went up among the people. Women pressed their palms together, whispering prayers of thanks. Men clapped each other on the back. Some of the children danced in the puddles forming around the well's edge. Dastan climbed out of the well, dripping and grinning. His mother threw her arms around him, not minding the mud. His father placed a hand on his head and simply said, "My son, you've saved us." Sophia held his face in her trembling hands and spoke softly. "No, he carried the knowledge of many to us. He carried the light Dastan knew." She was referring not only to the literal lamp of learning he brought, but also the lanterns of the festival, the spirit of hope and unity they symbolized. Over the next week, gentle rains, at last, began to fall as well, as if in response to the people's renewed hope. Dark clouds rolled in on an otherwise quiet afternoon, and the heavens opened. The villagers laughed and danced in the rain, faces turned upward. Dastan stood among the golden rows of half-parched, half-reviving wheat, arms outstretched, letting the rainwater mingle with joyful tears on his cheeks. He thought of Aurora's lanterns again, and how their glow was not so different from this blessing of rain. Both were gifts from the sky. With water secure and rains returned, the village's future brightened. The harvest that year, though modest, was enough to carry them through winter, augmented by some grain gifts sent from Aurora. Elias had arranged a charitable shipment upon hearing of the drought. The crisis had passed, and in its wake came a profound sense of gratitude and community. That autumn, under the harvest moon, the villagers held a festival of their own, a humble echo of Aurora's grand one, but heartfelt and warm. They hung every lamp and lantern they could find around the village square. Children, including Dastan's little cousins, ran about with small candles on sticks, giggling at the play of light. The women laid out a feast, featuring the best of their saved produce: stewed pumpkins, spiced breads, and even a few precious dates and nuts in honey. In the center of the square, by the old oak tree, Grandmother Sophia led a simple ceremony of thanks. The villagers gathered in a circle, holding hands as Sophia offered words to the sky, the earth, and the ancestors for guiding a young one safely to knowledge and back. She looked directly at Dastan during this, her eyes shining with pride. When the formalities gave way to celebration, music started up, an upbeat tune on a flute and drum played by two of the farmers. Dastan found himself dancing with his mother, and then being whisked into a jig with a cluster of his friends. Laughter rang out as they twirled under the lantern light. Later in the evening, as the festivities mellowed, Dastan sat with his family near their cottage. The air was crisp and clear. Above, the same familiar stars twinkled, the hero Arslan among them, steady in the north. They sipped hot tea from the leaves he'd brought Sophia, and he regaled them with tales of Aurora. He described the towering library shelves. His father shook his head in wonder at the thought of so many books. The delicious samsa pastries. His mother insisted he teach her the recipe. And the incredible moment when thousands of lanterns rose like new stars. Sophia closed her eyes as if seeing it through him. Under the gentle glow of a village lantern, his family listened, enraptured, to every detail. Though they might never travel so far themselves, through Dastan's words, it was as though they too had walked the marble streets, heard the festival bell, and felt the collective heartbeat of the empire. That night, when all had turned in, Dastan stepped outside one last time. The village was quiet, save for the chorus of crickets and the rustling of the now moist breeze through the trees. In the sky, the Milky Way stretched like a bridge, connecting distant horizons. He thought of Ilias, Tarin, and the friends he'd made in Aurora, under this same sky, likely wondering how he fared. He thought of the world beyond his sight, a world he had touched, and which had forever changed him, as he had changed his small part of it. From his pocket, he drew out a tiny object, a leftover festival lantern candle, which he had kept. He lit it from the cottage's hearth ember and set it on the windowsill. Its soft glow cast a flickering light around him. "Good night," he whispered, to the sky, to the land, to the friends near and far, and to the future which awaited with untold stories. As Dastan climbed into his familiar bed and drifted to sleep, he understood deeply that Tartaria, his Tartaria, was not just one lost civilization or a grand empire. It was the tapestry of countless daily lives, village and city, family and stranger, woven together by threads of kindness, knowledge, and hope. And as in all good stories, each day ended with the promise of a new dawn. Good night, dear listener, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle light of those ancient lanterns, guiding you to your own bright dawn.